Hello, everyone. Happy 2023. On behalf of Scott and myself, we'd like to welcome you into the first edition of the WBA Compliance Corner for January of 2023. And as is always, our agencies have released a number of different things that keep you and us busy. So we'd like to cover some of those things here briefly in our video, and we will follow our common format that we have for the last several months. So you'll see first up an agenda. And on today's agenda, we have a number of different things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the joint statement that was issued here recently regarding crypto asset risks for banks. Also, an FTC proposal about banning non-compete clauses. Heads up on some IRS refunds that may have already been going out, just to let you know what might be coming through your teller lines. Scott's going to cover the CFPB's fall regulatory agenda, which always means new rules for us to review and implement. Also, some updates to the OCC's guidance, Fannie and Freddie update, as well as, lastly, mortgage servicing examination procedures update by the Bureau. So with that laundry list, let's kick into it, and let's launch into the first topic, that being a joint statement that was issued beginning of this month, right away in January. And the statement itself identifies a number of different activities related to crypto assets that the regulators believe is a potential risk to banking organizations. And Scott and I wanted to include this document because we know from the calls that we receive and our conversations with our bankers here in Wisconsin that a number of you offer crypto-related activities for your customers, as well as have received a number of different inquiries from your customers about what is crypto, et cetera. So to help banks just know of the position of the agencies, we wanted to include this information. And as has happened in our past videos, we're continuing it here in the new year, that when you see an asterisk, there'll be a link for you for the guide. And when you look at that guide, you'll see a laundry list of items that, again, the agencies have identified as being potential risks to banks from an activity standpoint, as well as their statements that they continue to monitor the activities of crypto asset related actions and gauge whether or not the activity is deemed in their minds to be safe for the banks to enter into. An important component of that statement we've included here on the right-hand side of your screen, which is basically kind of a caution of the activity that the agencies do not believe is safe or sound activity. And while we don't think banks are actually doing this, we did want to make sure that you were aware of this in the event that maybe your board wants you to go down this path. So as the takeaway, know of the statement, read through the risks that have been identified. And as Scott and I always say, have an open dialogue with your regulator about what you're wanting to do, how you're protecting the bank, how you're protecting your customers, how you're going to engage in making sure that all of the compliance-related criteria are met, including BSA, and how are you going to be monitoring the risk to the financial institution? The agencies are clearly worried that the activity that we've seen back in 2022 could pose a risk to the bank just because of what's been going on. So I think no surprise by some of us, but at the same time, wanting to make sure that if you're wanting to go down this path, advocate for yourself to go down the cryptocurrency related path. So enough about that particular topic. Let's move on to the next topic, that being a proposed rule that the Federal Trade Commission has recently issued. And it relates to non-compete agreements, where the agency is wanting to ban those types of agreements within our contracts with employees. And the reason why Scott and I wanted to include this in our conversation this month is to help you with the scope. So first of all, what is it and what's the scope? We believe that as bankers, we have many different email blogs that we listen to or follow. And so through our various resources, you're likely going to be seeing a lot of buzz around this particular proposal. And one of the things that we wanted to alert you to is that the proposal itself does not have a direct impact on a bank. FTC does not have regulatory authority on the bank. However, it does have regulatory authority over your affiliates. So for some of you that may apply, and for others it will not. If it does apply, we've also provided for you some bullet points on the left-hand side of your screen about what the proposal would look to do. It would look to make it illegal for an employer to enter in or to attempt to enter into a non-compete agreement with your staff. If you currently have a non-compete, the proposal would look to invalidate that so that you could no longer maintain such an agreement with your worker, as well as it has rules that would impact how you represent to an employee, whether or not you have a non-compete or not, or that they would be subject to a non-compete agreement or not. We also wanted to include for you a bullet point as a reminder about Wisconsin law. And generally underneath Wisconsin law, the courts aren't all that favorable when it comes to wanting to enforce what we refer to as restrictive covenants in an agreement. So they can be very tricky to write, and there are some key components about what you need to consider when entering into a restrictive covenant. So if you have a non-compete agreement with an employee, know that one, the FTC proposal will not invalidate that or not have an impact on that because of their proposal as it relates to the bank. And two, always make sure that you're working with your counsel when you're drafting or reviewing or contemplating entering into restrictive covenants with your employees because of the court cases and the history that we have here in Wisconsin on that particular topic. So enough about those two topics. I'm going to turn it on over to Scott to take us through some of our other issues for today.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, a few more things to go through here. The first one we have for you relates to IRS refunds that are being issued and actually completion of rounds of refunds that IRS has been working on here for the past couple years. And so for this issue, this is something that we wanted to talk about because, you know, throughout the pandemic, we've had EIP payments, for example, those stimulus funds, as well as some tax credits, and a lot going on that is affecting your customers. And they might be coming in with questions of, oh, I'm expecting this, or they maybe have a check or a notice, or they're reading something. And so they go into the bank with questions to you on how they get that or when they can expect it. So as a bit of background on this one, this relates to taxpayers who overpaid on their 2020 unemployment compensation. And what that means is that part of the American Rescue Plan excluded up to a certain amount. You can see that on the slide here in the bullets, up to $10,200 in unemployment compensation from taxable calculations. So that didn't have to be counted as income for those years, for those who qualified. Now, some taxpayers might have filed prior to the act, and then they would have reported that as compensation, which otherwise were then subsequently able to exclude. So they could go ahead and correct that on their own. But also in 2021, IRS went ahead and said that they would review 1040s, which had already been filed prior to the act, so that then IRS could identify those who were eligible for the correction and then start issuing refunds on their own. So leading up to what happened just this month, IRS has been issuing those refunds since 2021, and now in January 2023 has announced that it would be issuing the final round of refunds, which is what this slide is all about. And what you're then possibly going to see, or maybe have already seen, questions from your customers or those that have received refunds directly. However, others might have it applied to other debts, but in any event, those covered should be getting a letter directly from the IRS. So again, if you're seeing those come in, or your customers are coming with questions saying, hey, why didn't I get this? Or I saw this news, or I saw something from the IRS. The communication from IRS has been very good. In addition to resources on their website, they can expect communication directly from the IRS on this. So just like in previous instances, you can direct them to those communications, you can direct them to those letters, and hopefully help assure them that that is out there and that IRS is communicating with them. So moving on to the next slide, we have CFPB's fall 2022 regulatory agenda. And of course here, always like to take a look at what the agencies are working on, in this case, CFPB. And front and center, we of course have Section 1071, right? So we've been talking about this, we've been anticipating this, and no surprises here, I suppose. But in the final stages, we have the small business data collection rules. So in short, we can expect a final rule no later than March 31st on this. So it's coming. It's coming in just a couple months here. And in terms of preparation, we've been talking about this, but kind of the two major things are, of course, we still need to see what's finalized in the rule, right? So we have the proposed rule, we looked through it, we commented on it, but what we can do to prepare now is really need to be considering what we're going to do in anticipation of that final rule, meaning what can we do to prepare for the fact that there will be inevitable adjustments to applications, right? And small business lending overall. So looking at that more holistically, preparing, being ready to read through the rule and hit the ground running will certainly help smooth that transition. We also have a few rules in the proposal stage. So CFPB is considering amendments to the CARD Act, particularly here looking at fees, penalty fees. CFPB is also part of an interagency effort. So along with the other prudential regulators, looking to consider the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, specifically here concerning regulations and standards for automated valuation models. Then also GRIPA. So we still have the Economic Growth Regulatory Relief Consumer Protection Act. Here specifically is a provision related to truth in lending that does require CFPB to write rules relating to property assessed clean energy. So you may have heard about this as PACE financing. So CFPB is going to be looking to issue a proposal on that. Lastly, a couple that are still in the pre-rule stage, so don't have a ton of news on this. Some of them will come as no surprise, I think. But again, to keep an eye on what we're expecting to see over the next year and next couple of years here. Amendments to Reg Z with regard to treatment of overdraft fees as a finance charge. So again, the definition of finance charge and treatment under Reg Z. And then, of course, new rules regarding NSF fees, which is a trend that just overall, I think we can expect to see continue this year, not just from CFPB, but the regulators as a whole. New changes to the FCRA. And then lastly, data aggregation and privacy rights. So this is a topic we actually just commented on this month related to 1033 of the Dodd-Frank. But in short, this relates to this world we live in of data aggregation and sharing. And, there's data aggregators, intermediaries between banks, and then the consumers that have this data. And the question of how do we balance the use of this data and the great things that can be done with it from a market perspective, from knowing what consumers look for in their products, creating new services for them to make their financial lives and relationships with the banks easier, but also considering how to protect that and who has access to that. And that is what CFPB is looking to do. We actually just commented on that this month, but currently CFPB is just in the fact-finding stage on that. So again, that's still very much in the pre-rule stage at this point. Nothing has been written. Moving on, I have a slide here just really quick with two items for OCC. So these just relate to booklets that OCC has, but as in the past, we just like to update you to know that CFPB has made changes to these booklets as they do from time to time, but they're important as they relate to exam procedures and what examiners refer to. So the first one we have is revisions to OCC's Fair Lending Booklet. This is the booklet that provides information and, again, exam procedures that the examiners are going to look at for guidance when they're looking at and assessing fair lending risk, compliance with FHA rules, ECOA, and Reg B. And so the revisions here include updated details, new risk factors for different exam scenarios, new references to supervisory guidance, risk management practices, and legal standards. Then the second bullet we have for you is just a revised branches and relocations booklet. So this just replaces a 2019 edition, really some minor updates for some recent rule changes, and then just removal of outdated guidance and references, as well as some minor changes and corrections. So again, just a mention for you on that. We've of course got the link if you wanted to take a look at either of those in more detail. But I will pass it back over to Heather to cover a couple more issues, starting with Fannie and Freddie's single family pricing.
Super. Thanks, Scott. And as we transition, I'll just add that, who thought compliance is boring? The CFPB regulatory agenda, we've got our plate full and look forward to all those different topics that are going to be coming down the list. So the fun is going to start yet this year. So stay tuned. But yes, Scott had mentioned we are wanting to alert the group that for those of you that deal with Freddie and Fannie, that they have or they will be changing their pricing framework for single family effective here in May. And it was too long of a list or too big of a grid to put within the slides themselves, but they have different pricing for purchase transactions, for rate term refinance, and for cash out refinance loans. And so we've included a link to the release, and the release then will link you to both the Fannie Mae lender letter, which we have designated here on the slide, as well as to the Freddie Mac bulletin. And through those resources, you will find the specific grids, which reflect then the new pricing. So that's really all I wanted to say here, but certainly check the link. We'll have the more detailed information within the attachment. But we also wanted to cover for you this month, more as an FYI, keep your eyes out for it, because not a lot of us here in Wisconsin are actually subject to CFPB's oversight directly. But what the CFPB does, we often see the other prudential regulators follow suit with, and certainly maybe something that your mortgage servicing companies are in fact adopting because they are a larger servicer. And so here, just a couple days ago, I believe the 18th of January, CFPB issued a blog about the fact that they were updating their mortgage servicing exam procedures and actually updated the procedures themselves. But when you read through the blog, what you'll find is that what they've done is something that they alluded to in a recent information collection that was out in the Fed Register, where they were wanting information from the mortgage industry about expanding or continuing to offer the service protections or options that were available during COVID, now that we're past the biggest part of the hurdle of COVID and back to more of a normal standpoint. And so the CFPB found that those streamlined approaches in the loss mitigation procedures or options were actually very helpful for many consumers. And so they've adopted those streamlined pandemic procedures into their examination procedures and are hoping that others will also follow suit. And so because of that follow suit approach, we wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. The CFPB is certainly concerned about banks charging fees for phone payments and for consultations. CFPB is also concerned about maybe some misrepresentations or some structuring of conversations away from homeowner assistance programs that are offered through various providers, including here through Wisconsin. So just be aware of what is in that blog. Be aware of the expanded mitigation options to now incorporate or looking to incorporate those that were made available during COVID. It's kind of the new status quo because you could very well be seeing that being adopted then by your service providers, or as I mentioned before, by our prudential regulators. So just an FYI, be aware of it. And certainly if it is picked up by the other prudential regulators, Scott and I will make you aware of it. But it's a change. It's a broadening of what is otherwise by statute included in the loss mitigation procedures combined truth in lending RESPA. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott because we did want to spend just a brief moment here highlighting some new resources, one that Scott worked very hard on to help provide a new toolkit to our membership. So Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And this was a team effort as well. So with Heather's help, we were able to complete this new resource for you. And just as in the past with this, so our monthly Compliance Corner updates here in these videos, looking to bring you, everything that has happened in the past months. In addition to that, on our website, we've looked to update that on a monthly basis as well to create additional resources for you. And of course, in these videos, we've taken a moment to update and let you know what is new and out there. So to that extent, wanted to take a moment to tell you about this one and focus on it for a moment. And this is a flood insurance toolkit. Not that there are any new rules for flood, but flood, being the big bear of a rule that it is in terms of what we have to deal with, it's very nuanced, often very fact specific, and a lot of details that we have to get into that can create some complicated scenarios that we frequently get questions on. And so we wanted to, with that in mind, create something that could comprehensively address much of what flood is. And again, from the rule perspective. So what this is actually a multiple component toolkit, starting with, and on this slide, you can just see snapshots to give you an idea of what is going to be contained within. So the first snapshot here is a text from the rule, and you can just see it's from section 1. It's the exact rule itself, but instead of just laying the rule out, we've also taken the time to create these notes, and the notes are designed to essentially put the rule into perspective that is a bit easier to digest, a bit easier to understand, as well as call attention to some specific parts that are, I suppose, read between the lines, or, why we have this, or how to help comply with it, or practical aspects. So again, give you something to read what the rule is, but also then understand it and know how that is going to actually relate to the business of lending. Then we have some additional tools, including a flow chart. So again, flow charts are certainly a helpful way to break things down. In this context, we wanted to create one to understand when the flood rules apply, because it's easy to say, oh, it's just a mire, right? But we all know it's more complicated than that, right? There's steps that go into determining what a mire is. And well, what if flood insurance isn't available, right? And so the flow chart really breaks it down step by step. So you could go through any given loan and refer to that to make that decision. Then in the middle here, we have a snapshot of different spreadsheets, of different checklists. And these checklists were designed for various positions at the institution. And the idea to bring together these rules within the context of there's many different individuals, many different roles that are working on flood and need to understand it from different angles. And so these were created generally for each position or a variety of positions to be able to have a consistent approach while meeting those flood rules and go through and check off what needs to be done. And, if this was checked, then we also need to make additional considerations. I think the best one here is cross-collateralization, which you can see kind of at the middle bottom of your screen, where all of this affects various operation within the lending department at an institution. And so we need to understand the cross-collateralization and the verbiage, how that relates to flood, and then what we need to do going forward. So again, cross-collateralization along with other components worked into there. And then lastly, there is a spreadsheet. This is an actual Excel spreadsheet that is a flood calculator. And it was created with formulas built directly into it, so that it's essentially you plug in your buildings, you plug in the amount, you plug in contents, you select the minimum insurance available, and so forth, and it'll kick out and tell you what your minimum amounts are. And then you just have to take that and apply that to the loan accordingly based on the properties you have. So there's some additional considerations that go into that. But as with all of these resources, they should be taken in consideration of the rule. They're designed to help, designed to give you additional resources and support in working through that, and should be used accordingly. But I would highly recommend everyone take a look at that. That's on our WBA Compliance website resource, right on the new resources. And what you'll find is there's the toolkit there. There's the checklist there, and there's the Excel spreadsheet there, all available for you to grab and use as you need. And of course, if you have any questions on how to use it or how to access it, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And then wanted to mention, along with some screenshots here again to show you what we still have on our website. We've got the WBA Best Practices Library that is out there. And this is a section that is created from the various WBA committees and sections. So this is, really by members for members. You can see for each one has its own page. For example, I'll use the financial crimes one as a resource, as that's a group that I work with, but you'll find affidavits for lost, stolen, or destroyed checks, for security procedures, bank robbery procedures, common fraud schemes and how to deal with them, training operations, and all sorts of different resources, be it for a security officer or compliance, right? So there's crossover into compliance for all of these. Then we have a separate section for consumer resources. WBMA we've of course talked about, but wanted to give you a visual to put to this as well. In addition to those WBMA resources, the communications team is working hard to create a lot of consumer-facing items. So such as over the holidays, we had budgeting assistance, how to avoid and spot common scams as those amp up around the time, the right time to look for a mortgage, vacation banking checklist, what we need to do to check our security before going out. And so all of these are designed for you to use to either distribute to your customers, to talk through them if they have any questions, print out and hand out to them. And you can see with that shopping for a bank account, this isn't just text, right? So communications has put some good flair on them, made them look appealing, visual, easy to use, and have infographics on there. As a lot of that stuff sticks a lot better when there's something corresponding to it that is, tangible or more appealing to look at. So again, just wanted to take a little bit more time to let you know that in addition to these Compliance Corner videos monthly, we are monthly updating the website as well with new resources. So I would highly encourage everyone to go out and check those sections. The only passworded section is the Best Practices Library. If you do not already have that password, please reach out to myself and Heather, and we can get that to you. Got some links here for you so you can find the pages that we just talked about on our webpage. And of course, the compliance hotline. Don't hesitate to reach out, call us either through the phone or email if you have any questions. But otherwise, with that, we will wrap up our first Compliance Corner of the new year. So happy 2023, everyone, and look forward to talking to you throughout the rest of the year.